Hello and welcome to History Bite, and today we're going to be talking about the Berlin Crisis of 1948, an event which included the Berlin Blockade and the Berlin Airlift and could have led to open conflict in the Cold War. Between 1947 and 1948, Germany, which had been split into four parts after the war, began to change. The western parts, controlled by Britain and the USA, had united their zones in 1947 to form Bizonia, and with the addition of France's zone in 1948, they had formed Trizonia. Stalin had felt left out, and because of rising tension, had determined that the best future for Germany was one in which communism acted as the ideology which unified Germany. In this way, Stalin could make sure he could extract all of the resources he could from Germany, therefore making sure it never rose again to threaten the USSR, and also rebuilding Soviet economy. So Stalin decided to hatch his plan. Berlin itself had been divided into four parts at Potsdam into the same four zones that Germany had been split into. But where Stalin held the advantage was that Berlin lay completely within the Soviet sector of Germany. Stalin knew that the western occupied zones in Berlin were therefore vulnerable because they were completely surrounded by Soviet territory. What made things even easier for Stalin was that there were only two land routes, or corridors, into Berlin from Trizonia. If Stalin was somehow able to cut off these corridors, perhaps he could stop western supplies and communications from reaching their zones. This might starve or alienate the people of western Berlin and put pressure on the West to hand Berlin over to Stalin completely. With the German capital under his control, it would only be a matter of time before communism could spread throughout the rest of Germany. It wouldn't be long, Stalin hoped, before all of Germany then fell under his control. So, in June 1948, Stalin actually decided to cut off all land routes into Berlin from the Western Allies' side. This included all roads, canals and railways, and this became known as the Berlin Blockade. In doing this, Stalin was hoping to prove to the West that a divided Germany wouldn't work. From Stalin's point of view, the West would then certainly buckle under the pressure, which would be a huge propaganda victory for him over them. However, President Truman was not a man to be easily challenged. The previous year, Truman had made a speech to the US Congress in which he had committed the US to proactive intervention to stop the spread of communism to new countries not already behind the Iron Curtain. So Truman had no intention of allowing Germany, with its vast natural resources, to fall to Stalin. Berlin would be where the US would dig its heels in and not budge. So in order to counteract Stalin's blockade, the US came up with a plan, the Berlin Airlift. Truman may have been willing to stand up to Stalin, but he also wasn't stupid. He knew that trying to force supplies through to Berlin by land would be extremely dangerous and might constitute an act of war, so a decision was made to fly the supplies to their western Berlin zones. This way, if Stalin had tried to shoot down the planes, it would make him the aggressor. Not even Stalin would go that far. So the Berlin Airlift, also known as Operation Vittles, had begun. The US flew coal, food and other supplies into Berlin. It was a huge risk, with pilots risking potential death if Stalin decided to shoot the planes down. The West Berliners came together in a cooperative spirit to receive the supplies, even going so far as to build a new airport at Berlin-Tegel. And everyone did their part. Ordinary citizens got stuck in and helped to unload the supplies, providing the support to all that was needed. And so it was that for 11 months the US managed to fly thousands of tons of goods every day, as were the British from their sectors of Germany. So, after almost a year of the Allies finding a way to get around the blockade by flying supplies in, Stalin had been put under pressure and he decided to lift the blockade. The airlift had miraculously worked. What was truly amazing was that there had been no casualties at all, and the people of West Berlin had been able to hold out against the threat of possible starvation. So the airlift had worked and there was no more Berlin Blockade, but what were the consequences of the Berlin Crisis of 1948? Well, firstly, by pushing for his propaganda victory, Stalin had only managed to have it turned back and slapped in his face. It was the Allies and the West Berliners who'd shown their resistance in the face of a threat and had banded together to show unity and dedication towards their cause. It was the USSR that now looked like the aggressor, while the West had come out looking good for their peaceful efforts to resolve the situation. As a result of the airlift, it was clear that Germany was not going to end its division anytime soon. Tensions between East and West were higher now than they'd previously been, and Britain and France and the US now attempted to create a permanent division between the East and the West. The same month that the blockade ended, on the 23rd of May 1949, the Western Allies turned Trizonia into the Federal Republic of Germany, also known as West Germany. The capital of West Germany was located at Bonn, and in September 1949, its first democratically elected Chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, took office. In response to this, in October 1949, Stalin turned the USSR's section into his own country, the German Democratic Republic. It was only officially recognised as a country by the USSR and its satellite states, but not by the West, which, as you can imagine, only made tensions worse. So now, by October 1949, Germany was not only ideologically divided, economically divided, it was now physically divided. For the next 40 years, East and West Germany would be separated, hoping for the day to come that Germany might once again be reunited. If you enjoyed this video and would like to find out more about history, why not subscribe to our channel or follow us on Twitter or Facebook?